Hi, everyone. This is Matt Andrzejewski, your research methods instructor. So, I wanted to talk a little bit. As students of psychology, we need to be able to recognize situations that are ethical or not as they apply to research contexts, experimental contexts, and so on. And I think a lot of us were horrified by the history of psychology and some of the experiments and research that's been done on vulnerable populations without informed consent, with all those issues that we read about in Unit 2 and videos that we watched and so on. So, but we also have to, while we can see those, we also are going to be later in the semester reviewing other people's proposals, and we have to take this to be able to take a perspective from ethical considerations. Now, each one of our morals and ethics differ a little bit, but the APA, the American Psychological Association, has given some guidelines. They've identified for us some issues that we need to look at when considering various things. So to practice a little bit, I came up with these 6 scenarios of research proposals. And what I asked you to do was to read them and think about them a little bit. Jot down a few notes about whether you think they're ethical or not, why or why not, and go on. This isn't a graded assignment, but just something to consider, to think about, to practice when we're considering research and so on. So if you haven't done that, stop the video and go and read them. They're very short. It will only take you a few minutes to read them, but I want you to think about them and then come back. Okay, the first one was just a really generic proposal. The proposed research involves implementing a new teaching technique at a local elementary school. The researchers would like to explore whether this new method is better than older methods. We have permission from the teacher and the principal of the school. The class will be divided randomly into 2 groups, one control group and one experimental group. So, is this ethical or not? It seems pretty straightforward. We're going to work with some kids at a school. We're going to try new teaching techniques. There's no details on the teaching technique, but let's assume that it's not painful or whatever. Anything in this proposal that gives you pause or gives you trouble. Now, I would say at first glance, there's nothing in it that gives me trouble. I mean, obviously, again, we don't know the details of the teaching technique, but assuming that it's okay, we're not given any details on the older teaching techniques, and the question becomes, what do we know about how teachers teach to begin with? But on the face of this is unethical. Given these words, this is unethical. And what's unethical about this is permission. You might have a teacher's permission, you might have a principal's permission, you might have the president's permission. What you don't have is the permission of the guardian, okay, or the subject to participate in this research. And one necessary aspect of informed consent is informed. The people that are participating in research or their guardians or their legal representatives have to be informed of what you're doing or that you're doing something. Now, this is typically covered, these sorts of experiments or research is typically covered by school districts. School districts do this all the time. School psychologists, people working in a variety of contexts do research at schools all the time. Generally, informed consent is covered by the fact that parents waive their right or they sign a form at the beginning of the year saying that your kid might be in a research project. It is deemed safe by the teacher, by the principal. If you have any concerns, you can ask and so on and so forth. But generally speaking, that's how this is covered. But this, because there's no details about informed consent here, we need to ask that. So if I were to see this proposal, I would say to the proposer that they need some statement, some details about informed consent. Okay. Research proposal number 2. The proposed research involves asking students in a psychology class to answer questions about their sexual interests, like, what is your sexuality? Have you ever fantasized about sex? Are you happy that you have these fantasies? Do you think your sexuality is moral? The participants' answers will be shared with class, and the class will vote whether or not we should share them on Facebook. So obviously a highly unethical study. The first question that we have to ask is about in the APA code, remember there was that category of beneficence and malfeasance. And beneficence is, we ask the question, how does it benefit us? How does it benefit society in general? How does it benefit the individual in the study, et cetera, et cetera? This doesn't seem to benefit anybody. I mean, it seems like a bizarre sort of study about something. Now, it could be part of a larger study about sexuality and adolescence, but I think they probably need to reframe the questions, be a little more cognizant of differences and so on. The fact that the stated goal too is to publish these in the class or share them on Facebook or something like that. It also suggests that there's some malfeasance here. There's some bad stuff that they're trying to approach. So I would come back and say, if you want to study adolescent or college sexuality, that's fine. People have done that. You know, there are many famous studies about sexuality, about sexual interests and preferences, and X, Y, and Z. Johnson and Johnson, you guys probably have heard of. Famous studies, but this clearly needs a lot of work, both in the questions that they're asking and how they're going to publicize it and for what purposes we're going to use it, and so on and so forth. Research proposal number 3. The proposed research project would like to study brain activity during emotional events. The goal of the research is to better understand the areas of the brain associated with emotional processing in the hopes that it will provide clinicians with information on emotional changes after traumatic brain injury. Participants will be placed in an fMRI machine and shown a series of images on a computer screen. Some of the pictures will be neutral, some will be pleasant, and some will be very graphic and disturbing. Participants will be required to give informed consent prior to the procedure. However, they will not be told about the graphic nature of the images because prior research has demonstrated that in doing so, the emotional response is significantly changed. They will be instructed that they may discontinue the experiment at any time. Additionally, in order to adequately protect the participants from the effects of coercion, after being shown 9 images, 3 of them will have been graphic, violent images. They will ask if they would like to continue after the experiment. They will be debriefed about the nature of the experiment and assured that no one was harmed in the making of the research materials. Is this an ethical research proposal? So in the past, when I propose this, when we read about this, most of the students point out this one as being unethical. Now, in particular, what features of this experiment or this proposed experiment are unethical? There's not a lot of features here that we would consider to be unethical. Maybe exposing people to graphic, violent content might be unethical, but it's not unheard of. It's not unethical to do so. We should consider the safety of the individual when we do this, but when we do a lot of interventions in psychology and medical sciences and so on, there are risks associated with it. The question is, are you informed of those risks? Why aren't you informed of those risks if you're not? And so on. And this proposal, I think, is pretty good. They're asked to give consent, but they're not told about the nature of the problem, the nature of the experiment, because if they are, it will blunt their response. It changes their response, and what we want is an unadulterated response to these sorts of images. So there's a reason to do this. If we are this research is valuable, according to the researchers. They say that it will help people with traumatic brain injury. So there's benefits here. They're debriefed. So in this case, I would say that this proposal is not too bad. There's a way out. If somebody wants to discontinue the experiment, they can. They're debriefed. Maybe there's some other things that we might add, but I don't know that this would be considered unethical. And research like this is being conducted in psychological contexts, believe it or not. Okay, moving on to number 4. Researchers would like to investigate how Christian image and icon degradation affects taste preference. They would like to gather information on which flavors might be best marketed on Sunday afternoons after service. Following informed consent and a description of the program, the researchers will show defamed and graphic images of religious symbols to church attendees. Then they will ask them if they prefer cherry, orange, or grape flavored items. Now, this is absolutely ridiculous, this study. What the link between iconography or religious images and taste preferences seems to be absurd. This wouldn't pass muster, I don't think, with any board unless you have some grounds for a relationship. But how could you come up with one? I don't know. This is a really bizarre experiment. It seems like somebody doing something really silly. Um, just unethical. There's no reason to believe that there's a link here between degradation of religious symbols, which would be horribly malfeasant to begin with, and then to ask people, now, if we're going to be doing something that is really harmful, we better make sure that the benefits of it are overwhelm the risks, right? That's part of the criterion. And here it would be flavor preferences. We do experimental surgery on people. So we're cutting into people, but we cut into them because we think the benefits of experimental surgery are going to outweigh the risks associated with the damage from cutting into somebody and having to sew them up and move organs around and so on and so forth. So this is clearly the benefits do not outweigh the risks, and it's just ridiculous. The researchers would like to conduct a market survey on the most popular radio station in the local area among 18 to 25-year-olds. Specifically, the research is aimed at determining if the new hit 109 is gaining market share. However, the researchers would tell the participants that the research is not about musical taste, rather than radio step. It will tell the participants that the research is about musical taste rather than radio station preference. This is necessary because people do not always identify the actual radio station that they listen to. Rather, most people tend to answer questions about their likes and dislikes, what they think the researcher wants, in effect known as the expectancy bias. The participants will be called at their place of residence in the evening hours. They will be told their answers are anonymous and not be shared with anyone. Only group data will be shared with the client. So this experiment involves deception, right? What we're doing is we're telling the subjects that they are we're doing something when we're doing something else. We're deceiving them. We're lying to them about the real cause of or the real purpose of the experiment. Does that make it unethical? And the answer is, in this case, no, it doesn't. Deception is used in research all the time. We don't tell everybody about everything and every detail about what they're going to experience. Namely, we do it because we have to have a rationale for not doing that. And in this research proposal, they provide that rationale. They say, this is necessary because people do not always identify the actual radio station they listen to. So in order to get an honest or a better, a more informative response, we're not going to tell them. Now, the risks associated with deceiving them about their musical tastes seem to be very limited here. We're not harming them in any way by asking them misleading or deceptive questions about their musical taste. If it was about something more serious, obviously that would raise ethical concerns, but this doesn't reach that standard. The other thing is their responses are protected by their anonymity. Even if we do deceive them, their individual responses don't really, they're just going to be collapsed into a group and sold to or given to this radio station. So we're not violating any confidentiality. We're not violating their anonymity either. They're just 18 to 25-year-olds telling us about their preferences. And even though we didn't tell them about the real research, it doesn't really matter. It seems to me that the benefits or the malfeasance or the risks associated with the deception are very minimal here. Okay, research proposals number 6. The proposed research would like to investigate grief, especially feelings associated with losing a close relative. The researchers would like to provide better bereavement therapy and thus require the strong emotions related to losing a loved one. So this seems like a legitimate, so far, study, right? They give us rationale of why they want to study this. Okay, so during funeral services at the local cemetery, the researchers will approach the family and ask them several questions about their loss. Since cemeteries are public spaces, no permission is required. If the potential participants refuse to participate, the researchers will tell them that it is really important for the advancement of our psychological knowledge that they answer these questions. If the researchers think it'll help, they should tell the potential participants that their loved ones would have really wanted you to help and answer the questions. If they continue to decline to participate, the researchers will tell the potential participants, how could you spit on the grave of your loved ones and not help us in our time of need? Following receipt of informed consent, researchers will proceed with the questions and thank them for their participation. So obviously a really horrible way to do an experiment. It's not very professional. It may undermine our authority or the goodwill of psychologists, the good position that psychologists hold in our society, I think, to a certain extent, by doing a study like this. Even though they're asking for informed consent, they are pressuring and badgering them, and this is not an ethical study at all. They're trying to get around some of the issues associated with asking people about grief, maybe later, like asking them to try to remember how you felt versus how you felt in the moment, but this is not going to do it. Okay, so I hope that gives you a little bit of a flavor of how we might evaluate proposals and so on, and hopefully it was helpful in talking about these things.